And we are moving to China, and Professor Grzejdziak will give us a lesson on industrial policy for electromobility, especially including EU state aid rules.
So, fantastic. Okay, I think it works. So good afternoon, everyone. Today I will have a pleasure to speak a little bit about Chinese industrial policy in electromobility sector and try to demystify the processes that are going there. But first, let me thank our hosts for having me here. This is my utmost pleasure to visit once again Katowice. It's my third time at this conference. Thank you, Ms. Chairman. Apparently this is probably the first international conference when my last name was properly pronounced. So it's something that really pleased me. Well, long story short, I will talk today about the lessons that EU industrial policy and state aid rules can take from the Chinese industrial policy in the area of electromobility. We all observe the, let's say, external effects of this policy. We can observe Chinese cars pretty much everywhere in Europe. We can observe growing industry. But we do not know how this happened and how it's going. But of course, electromobility and industrial policy in sector of electromobility is rather a pretext or maybe an opportunity for me to talk a little bit about the future directions of the European state aid law and European industrial policy. Because as we all observe, we now live in times of economic changes, the times in which superpowers, global superpowers, strain their muscles. We observe trade wars. We observe aggressive industrial policy. Chinese policy here in this sector is one of the examples. The question is now, what should the EU do with this one? Should we respond aggressively as well? Should we have a similar industrial policy in certain sectors? And the answer to this question could be quite easy, but in the European Union, we have a genuinely European invention which is called state aid rules. And they are limiting our freedom to subsidize economy. But there were good reasons to have state aid rules. And the question is, should we re-liberalize them? Tough word. Or should we rather stay with the principles we have? So, to answer this question, I will first discuss industrial policy and its relation to state aid rules. Then I will try to refer to the example of Chinese industry and try to draw certain lessons from it. So first, well, I will start from the anecdote I heard from the first president of the Polish Competition Authority, Professor Anna Fornalczyk. She once told me the story when she was leaving her office. It was in the first half of the 1990s, and she had a farewell meeting with a new prime minister of Poland, Waldemar Pawlak, at the time. And she just reported that they were working on some kind of a new act, new project, new bills, including the Polish Act on State Aid, which was at the time realization of our obligations under the Act of Association with the European Union. And when Prime Minister Pavlak heard about this project, he said, wonderful. Finally, we will have opportunity to transfer giant money to companies. No, 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 absolutely not. State aid is on the contrary. State aid imposes limits. So, of course, let's put aside the ignorance of the former Polish Prime Minister, but this misunderstanding, it perfectly illustrates the tensions or the different perspectives of state aid or subsidizing economy from the point of view of national authorities and the European Union. Well, first, from the point of view of national authorities, state aid is yet another tool of industrial policy. Subsidizing economy is a very effective and very popular tool because we are giving something. It's rather a carrot type of approach, not a stick type of approach. So we are giving some subsidies here. But from the point of view of the European Union, it's something different. Why can't subsidies and in general industrial policy can't be seen in the EU in the same way as in member states? There are three reasons. First, well, the EU is a sui generis but still international organization. So we have different member states. Second, every subsidized project must be somewhere located. So not in the European Union in abstractive way, but in certain member state. And the third one, somebody has to pay for it. And usually national money are used here. So now we have this internal market perspective. State aid rules were invented in Treaty of Paris to maintain level playing field between member states, to avoid a subsidy war between member states, to facilitate the creation of the internal market. And from the very beginning, the concept of state aid was based on ordoliberal premises. Here we have one of the creators of ordoliberalism and social market economy, Alfred Miller-Armack. And this concept is focused on the idea that in the very center of the economy shall be placed a free market with economic freedom. And intervention, public intervention, must be considered only as an exemption, driven by certain considerations, including most of all the market failure. So once market failure is identified, the European member state may finance certain actions that are targeted to at least decrease the effects of this market failure. So it must be market failure oriented. And second, when state aid is given, it is subject to two very important principles. First, proportionality. It must be no more than that it is needed to address this market failure. Second, it must be effective in targeted market failure. So if we look at the EU state aid policy, this is a quotation from a kind of an old document from 2005 State Aid Action Plan, but it's still valid, more or less, in which the EU Commission explained that state aid may be declared compatible with the treaty provided it fulfills clearly defined objectives of common interest, usually correcting market failures. improving the functioning of markets and enhancing European competitiveness. They can also help promote certain other goals. But in general, the logic behind this is that free market is organizing certain processes. When there is a market failure, there is a rationale for public intervention, but it must be proportional and it must be, of course, effective. Fine. So now let us go back from 2005 to 2025. Now we are living in a different reality. We are living in times of first time of crisis. We suffered a couple of crises. Starting in 2008, we had the financial crisis, 2007, 2008. Then we had, of course, COVID. We had Russian aggression in Ukraine and certain disturbances in the global economy. So the European Union started, in fact, already to liberalize certain rules. So the European Union didn't stay indifferent to these challenges. So in this slide, we can observe certain elements of this new policy in the area of state aid, which is based on some kind of liberalization of rules targeted especially to certain technologies. We have, for instance, CHIPS Act for Europe. We have, of course, the EU Green Deal and the rest of the measures supporting the just transition we are talking about here. We have certain other policy documents of the European Union liberalizing state aid rules. But apparently, and there is a discussion in scholarship, whether we observe a paradigm shift here in the area of state aid. And in fact, I don't think so. It's still rather a mild liberalization, going from a concept of maybe market failure to a concept of systemic failure of the economy, which is quite similar, but giving the European Commission much more discretion in directing state aid and to create certain policy initiatives. But still, the EU is upholding the core principles of market regulations. And now the question is, should we go further? Should we just start a subsidy race with China in the area, let's say, of electromobility? Do state aid rules, in fact, weaken our European Union in global competition? Well, China does not care about state aid. The US do not care about state aid. So the question is, should we go further? And let us now refer to the core, to Chinese policy in the area of automotive industry. We see the external, as I previously said, external effects of this policy. And the external effects are that they produced 30 million units of cars, mostly electric vehicles, in 2023. Probably this year it will be 35. 9 million units a year will be exported by 2030. Of course, not only electric vehicles, we are talking also about conventional, traditional cars, but mostly electric vehicles. 60% of all global electric vehicle sales are Chinese cars. We have now probably 55 million of units of production capacity in China. Just to give you just to imagine the scale, in the European Union, we sell a year like 16 million cars. In the US, it's 18, roughly. So they have a capacity to produce all the cars we need in these two big economies and much, much more. So how this happened? What are the sources of the Chinese success? So first, definitely lower labor costs, but as we compare now the situation in China and, well, let's say, Morocco, where the European cars are produced, not a big difference, I believe. The question of dominance in battery raw materials, which is very important here. In fact, China controls over 60% of global raw material processing for batteries and more than 80% of global battery cell manufacturing. And this is serious, in fact, source of this dominance. Access to other inexpensive raw materials, giant production capacities, advanced technologies, platformization strategies, and of course, industrial policy, which is based on massive subsidies. So how this happened? They started to build the capacity in the 80s, but it was growing through the years. The pivotal point was probably in 2007 when one gang, a gentleman who was previously a head of Volkswagen China, became a minister of industry, Chinese minister of industry, and, of science and technology, as it is written here, and he started to push forward the idea that, in fact, in traditional cars market, China probably has no chance in rivalization with established producers. But there is a gap in the market, electric vehicles, and they started to invest money. And in 2017, there was a medium and long-term development plan for the automotive industry, which imposed a target of 35 million cars to be produced by 2025 a year annually. And here in Poland, we understand how it worked. If the Communist Party established a target of 35 million, it meant that local party bonzos, local party officials, started to implement the plan. Every provincial governor wanted to have a factory, because you don't want to stay for whole your life and do your career in a province. You want to go to Beijing. And that is why they started to subsidize factories in China, in local factories. Totally uncoordinated situation. They were based on the concept of volume before profit. Profits were not important. The target that party established was important. So paradoxically, we had competition between local governments. They were investing giant money, and these factories were just, and the subsidies were enormous. In general, we have here forms of subsidies. Maybe forms are not so important, but the two things are important. They were all connected with the concept of volume. So they were conditional upon a certain target to be obtained. That is why volume was here important. And second, value is important. It was roughly between, it's just very hard to say because we do not have data, but it's between 28 to 50 billion US dollars per year that were invested in this industry. But there are certain, we rarely consider that the other side of this equation, the costs, or maybe the relation between costs and benefits, the effectiveness. So in other words, how much did they get back from their investment? So now we are only beginning to see the medium and long-term consequences of this policy. We, of course, observe the threat to the position of European and US and Japanese and Korean car makers, but we do not we just started to analyze the negative sides. So first, poor coordination or almost no coordination of this industrial policy. So China's automotive policy suffers from a lack of coordination. Central governmental policy is there, but local policies are applied independently of themselves. So this makes, this is often uncoordinated and rather competitive than complementary. So this creates inefficiencies, giant inefficiencies. Many activities are just duplicated, redundant. Second, there is a tolerance for inefficient business models, so volume before profit. Now, local authorities are eager even to protect local actors, local factories, because they will never be probably profitable. But at the same time, it will be a shame for local governors to have a failure. That is why they are still subsidized, no matter what will be the profit of the factory. So then short production life cycles, because it's profit, it's volume before profit, and that there are targets based on volume. There are very short production life cycles. Usually in Europe, it's in the market, it's 6-8 years for a model, for a car model. In China, it's roughly 3 to 4 years. This creates a lot of inefficiencies. For instance, higher research and development costs, marketing costs, quality risks increase because they are not able to work so fast and to produce new models that will have a good quality. And it requires maintaining extensive spare parts inventories, which is also problematic. But there's also overproduction and pathological consequences of it. So now China has more domestic brands producing more cars that not only Chinese but the global market can absorb. In fact, they have roughly 129 brands of electric vehicles, and probably only 15 of them could be profitable by 2013. The rest is not profitable, and it's not the situation that there is any possibility for them to be profitable in future. Then there is a problem now with selling these cars. You can buy a car with 60% of reduction in price in China, not covering the costs, of course. I will skip telling you or talking about the another elements here, but it will end. We are absolutely sure that this will have to end. It cannot be financed through the infinity. And there is, of course, overinvestment. They do not need the capacity of roughly 55 million units, which is now the case. So probably these factories are just redundant. So apparently there is a claim that markets started a counterattack to Chinese industrial policy and is saying, check, I'm checking you. And we'll see what will come. Probably, of course, we will have some global players still in the market. They will be able to have MG and some other BYD and some other brands in the market, but the rest will go out. So, conclusions. I'm sorry, I know that I'm talking a little bit too long, but when we look, what lessons can we have from this type of policy? So first, well, a sensible, prudent, and market-oriented or proportional industrial policy is just more effective. The same effect could be obtained with probably 20 or 30% money invested by China. EU state aid rules promote efficiency promote efficiency and proportionality. Of course, we can change them. We can make them more flexible. We can, for sure, and we must, protect European car makers against subsidy or industrial policy of China for some time at least. But in fact, I think that when we apply state aid rules correctly and effectively, this can be not a disadvantage for the European Union, but rather a benefit for its industrial policy. Thank you very much.